Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on funding opportunities under innovation procurement in Horizon 2020, organized by Euresearch. You have just seen a very short video about Euresearch. We are the Swiss network providing information, hands-on advice, and partner search help related to European research and innovation programs. My name is Agnes Sabreni. I'm a scientific advisor for health, and I have today with me Stefan Fischer, the Swiss national contact point for ICT, energy, and Euratom. We have the pleasure to welcome today's two speakers, Vasilis Tzanidis from the European Commission and Dr. Bob Jones from CERN. Before we get started, we would like to go over a few items about today's event. I hope everyone can hear us properly. If this is not the case, we recommend you to use a headset. On our attendee interface on the left side, you see the slides for each talk with a photo of each speaker. And then on the right side, there is a chat box where you can type your questions anytime during the webinar. We will collect these questions and address them during a Q&A, question and answer session at the end of each presentation. Please note that this is a live event, so unfortunately we are unable to provide technical support during the webinar. However, when you encounter a glitch, we recommend to restart this Adobe Connect plugin or your browser. It often helps. The webinar is recorded, so if you missed any parts, you can catch up with it later on. Now, moving on to the agenda. So we have two speakers today from the European Commission and then a project testimonial for a successful project from CERN. But before we start, we would like to know your background. So let's start with a poll. There are two questions. This will probably take you a couple of seconds. So the first question is, what is your research sector? There are multiple answers possible, so you can click more answers. And then the next question is, what is your expectation from this webinar? It's just, we take a few moments for you to answer this. Okay, I see that most of you have responded. Yes. So we're going to close and we can broadcast the results. Okay. Okay, thank you very much for answering. It gives us a better understanding. And now we are moving on to the agenda. Okay.
So my name is Stefan Fischer. I'm NCP for ICT, Energy and Euratom at Euresearch. I would like to welcome Vasilis Tzanidis, Policy Officer at DG Connect, directly from Brussels. He will tell us anything we need to know about PPIs and PCPs. Please.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this webinar. My name is Vasilis Tzanidis. Actually, I work in DG Connect, Startups and Innovation Unit, and my file is Innovation Procurement. I'm really happy to speak about Innovation Procurement in this webinar because I think it's the first time that I have the opportunity to speak about Innovation Procurement to Swiss researchers and stakeholders in general. Every time I start my presentation from a very introductory slide. Next slide, please, if possible. About innovation procurement. This is a slide addressed mainly to the newcomers to the innovation procurement family, because we consider ourselves that are working for a family. It's a very close, very familiar, family-oriented sector. Actually, what is innovation procurement? Innovation procurement in Horizon 2020 is comprised by two different procedures: pre-commercial procurement, that is a procurement of R&D services, and public procurement of innovative solutions, where the public sector acts as a launching customer purchases innovative goods or services that are not fully commercialized yet. As you can see in this slide, there are, let's start with PCP. PCP, that is, as I mentioned, the procurement of R&D services, is structured around 3 different phases. Phase 1 is about solution design, phase 2 is about prototype development, and phase 3. In phase 3, the original development and testing of limited volume of first test products and services is taking place. How this procedure work? Actually, procurers that have a real procurement need. That's why in PCPs we skip phase 0, curiosity driven research. For us, it's really important the whole process PCP to be based on existing well-identified public need. So a consortium of procurers identify first the public need before the PCP action project, and then they invite the market to develop through R&D innovative solutions that could tackle this public need, that could address this public need. How this happens? They launch a call for tenders, and they invite all interested parties to submit an offer. In phase 1, the partners, all the selected, the successful offers receive a framework agreement that covers the 3 phases of the PCP, as well as a contract for phase 1 solution design. As you can see, there is a competition taking place throughout the PCP process. At the end of phase 1, there is an evaluation of the offers and the work that has been done, and only the best solutions pass to offers, and offers pass to the second phase. And this happens to the third phase. So the number of suppliers is reduced when we pass from one phase to another, and we require at least 2 solutions to be tested in phase 3. Why so? Because our main concern, our main objective is to avoid lock-in. That's why procurers need to test at least 2 solutions to know that at least 2 suppliers are capable of offering very good solutions for their need. And at this point, PCP stops. PCP stops with the testing of the solutions. Procurers can possibly buy during this PCP the prototypes developed through this PCP, but not commercial volumes of these solutions. This purchase belongs to another procedure that calls Public Procurement of Innovative Solutions, that follows a PCP. But I will speak about that later on. Again, to PCP, what is important to note for PCP is that the suppliers keep the generated intellectual property rights for further commercialization, and that is reflected in the price, because usually the suppliers are requested to submit lower offers compared to the case where the IPRs would have been kept by the procurers. What is also important to note about PCP lies outside the scope of the Public Procurement Directives and WTO rules. Why that is important? That is important because it gives us flexibility to limit the implementation of R&D where in Europe. So that gives us an advantage to request to the implementation of R&D to take place in Europe. So the PCP ends with the testing of the first limited volume of first products or services. If the procurers are happy with the solutions tested, then we can move to a PPI, that it is a legally separated procedure compared to PCP, and there is no R&D involved in this procedure in PPI. It's only the purchase of the innovative solutions that are not yet fully commercialized. PPI is a normal procurement procedure. Procurers can in Horizon 2020 can choose any open procedure described in the Public Procurement Directives, and conformance testing may also take place in PPI. I would like to highlight that there is no need to have a PCP always preceding a PPI. If the procurers feel comfortable to purchase the innovative solutions without testing them through R&D, they can move directly to PPI without a PCP preceding it. But it's recommended because innovation has an inherent risk to de-risk through a small-scale PCP large purchases of innovative solutions. Okay, good. There is it's also win-win for the public sector in Europe. Why? Because with a smart use of procurement budget, we can help remove supplier lock-in, and we can obtain more standardized and better value for money solutions in a cost-effective manner. And why in a cost-effective manner? Because as we have seen in PCP, there is competition also in the contract implementation stage. In times of economic distress, there is no need for extra funds to support R&D, but we can use the existing funds for the procurement budget to support innovation. There are benefits to the local economy because the innovative solutions purchased through PPI or the innovative solutions developed through PCP can need maintenance, need upgrade, so that's this will trigger innovation in the local economy. And last but not least, this instrument PCP-PPI creates growth and jobs in Europe. Why that? Because as we have seen, we can limit the implementation of R&D in Europe. Next slide, please. Also, it's not only win-win situation for the public sector, but also for the private sector in Europe. The power of the public purse can open market opportunities for companies in Europe, and I will provide some evidence of that in the findings of the first on PCPs that have completed their contract award. The public sector can act as a launch customer to help startups in Europe and finally go to the market. And because what is important for companies to find market opportunities, and public procurement can offer these market opportunities to companies in Europe. These observations have led to the Scale-Up Manifesto. It's a consortium that is comprised of more than 8,000 SMEs and startups in Europe to call on the member states to open public procurement by supporting more innovation and to allocate percentages of their annual procurement budget to innovation procurement. 3% of the annual procurement procurement expenditure to PCPs and 20% to public procurement of innovative solutions. This is because the companies, the SMEs and the startups consider that PCP PPI offers them market opportunities that could help them scale up. Next slide, please. Also, this complementarity and between PCP and PPI and the phased approach help get 20% better value for money products, because as you can see, we can de-risk PCP through innovative purchase through PPI, through a small-scale PCP where competition is preserved during the contract execution stage. They can use PPI if R&D needed for procurement need. So PPI is an option, is not an obligation. They can use a small PCP to de-risk a large budget PPI, as I mentioned earlier. They can use conditions procurers that encourage job creation in Europe, especially because PCP falls outside the WTO rules and allows us to limit the implementation of R&D in Europe, and prevents foreclosing of competition and crowding out of private investment in R&D. Why? Because as you have seen in PCP, there is competition on 12 stages and 12 phases of implementation, and we require at least 2 solutions to be tested, so in order to avoid lock-ins in future PPIs, and facilitates access to procurement market for SMEs. Why is that? Because especially for PCPs where not actual purchase of the innovative solution is involved, procurers can be flexible, can have more flexible selection criteria that allow the participation of SMEs to develop innovative solutions through R&D and then to scale up through the purchase of innovative solutions through PPI. Next slide, please. All these considerations they have included in the communication of the year 2016, the communication 733 about startup and scale up initiative. This communication acknowledges that public procurement contracts can support scaling up activities, but SMEs are still underrepresented, in particular for so-called above threshold procurement. That public procurement is a almost 2 trillion market, represent and great potential for these SMEs to scale up, and better support to contracting authorities. We need a better support to contracting authorities on using the market opportunities, and the modernized tools are necessary to improve the uptake of innovative startups and scale-ups. This communication also, in line with the Scale-Up Manifesto, calls on the member states to set ambition innovation buying targets to trigger the startup, the market, and to enable the startups scale up in Europe. Next slide, please. This slide shows how the impact has grown at European level. In year 2008, when the communication, 1 year after the communication of PCP has been published, in the year 2007, we saw that there were some council and conclusions on PCP, but then a lot of work has been done, a lot of activities have taken place, and we have some early council recommendations that again call on the member states to increase their budget expenditure for innovation procurement. This new initiative, European Assistance for Innovation Procurement, is launched. I will explain that later. And I can hear also the background noise. First, it's the first joint cross-border PCP launched. Next slide, please. Now this slide illustrates the activities taking place at member state level. again, in the year 2008, only few member states have had some activities to support innovation procurement, on the UK and the Netherlands. Things have changed, and more member states foresee support to innovation procurement through means like European structural funds or other national funding. Next slide, please. What countries and regions do to support innovation procurement, and they can, first of all, what is important is to create the right political setup, the right political scenery, to provide political encouragement for the implementation of innovation procurements at member state level or regional level. They can set the modernization of the public sector as a priority, and they can put some quality and efficiency improvement targets, and this has happened in the Lombardy region in Italy as well as in the UK. They can target, as the members and the startups have already called on the member states to do that, target percentages of the procurement budget to research and development. This has already happened in some member states like UK, the Netherlands, Spain, France, etc. They can assist the procurers in the implementation of innovation procurement, for example, by setting up innovation procurement competence centers, and they can provide some innovation procurement financial support programs. This is happening in some member states like Sweden, Finland, Spain, etc. What is important is the open market consultation to encourage the demand side to meet the supply side, so to encourage the procurers to hear what the market is capable of offering, and of course to inform all stakeholders about the possibility to leverage EU funding through Horizon 2020, structural funds, or EU European Investment Bank loans. Next slide, please. Why do we support European cooperation on PCP PPI? To speed up public sector modernization, to get better value for money through cooperation, through the aggregation of demand, we can trigger the supply side, the market, to submit better offers in terms of quality and in terms of price. They can address issues of common interest together that concern the public procurers participating in the PCP or PPI in a way that they can achieve interoperability and coherence of solutions, and also defragmenting the market at the same time. And we can create growth centricity in Europe. Why? Again, because PCP can be limited in Europe. The implementation of PCP, can be limited in Europe. Next slide, please. This is the Horizon 2020 support to innovation procurement. As you can see, the Horizon 2020 support has increased from the year 2009 and 2010, when DG Connect started to put some budget to support innovation procurement. Now almost in Horizon 2020, in every work program, there is almost 130 million euros allocated to support innovation procurement in many areas of public interest, like e-health, space, security, climate change, energy, and so on, ICT, of course, and so on. Next slide, please. This slide, the next three slides present the ongoing innovation procurement projects in FP7 and Horizon 2020. This is a slide that presents the ongoing PCPs in the health and active aging domain. In red circle are the newcomers in this family, the newcomers, the PCPs that have started last year. Next slide, please. This slide presents the ongoing PCPs in other domains like e-government, transport, education, safety, sustainability, research, and smart watering sector. Next slide, please. This slide provides an overview of the EU-funded PPIs, again mainly in areas like health, aging, transport, sustainability. In the red cycle are the newcomers, the ones that have started last year. Next slide, please. These are the CSAs, the network of procurers that prepare the ground for future PCPs or PPIs. Again, in areas like health aging, health and active aging. Health and active aging is a sector that has a lot of PCPs, PPIs and CSAs because there is a lot of interest from procurers to do PCPs and PPIs in this area. Transport as well, ICT of course, and sustainability. Next slide. We have this slide presents 16 the 16 PCPs that are busy or busy procuring or have completed their procurement activity in many areas in public areas, as you can see, like robotics for elderly care, in science, cloud, personalized learning solution, and so on. Next slide, please. 9 buyer groups are still in open market consultation preparing an PCP. So if you are an SME or a company or a supplier, potential supplier, university that could be a potential supplier, stay tuned in order to find more market opportunities through these procurements. You can all information is available on our website. Next slide, please. I presented you these 16 PCPs. Why? Because I would like to show you some findings from these PCPs that have completed the procurement activity or have awarded contracts. The findings from these PCPs show that open market consultations are very beneficial to the attract a lot of interest from the supply side, from the market players. Involved in these 16 PCPs from 70 to 300 companies and researchers per PCP. The call for tenders, as regards the call for tenders, the number of offers per PCP received was from 10 to 48. That means a great. I mean, these PCPs have communicated their message and they attracted the interest of the market players, so they received a lot of offers. As well, regarding the contract award, 73 procurers are cooperating in this 16 buyers group, and in these 16 PCPs, 104 contracts have been awarded. The winning bidders involve 147 companies, as well as 20 universities and research criteria. We see that universities, a lot of universities participate not as beneficiaries in these projects, in these PCPs, as procurers, but as suppliers, collaborating with the SMEs in order to submit an offer and to implement a contract awarded in the framework of these PCPs. Next slide, please. The findings from this first PCP show that PCP is an instrument that opens a route to the market for new players. 71% of contracts won by SMEs SME leader, compared to 29 average in public procurement across Europe. 18 of these contracts won by large companies as a single bidder. 11% of these contracts won by consortia of larger companies and SMEs bringing innovative products together to the market. 28% of winning contracts have also university and R&D center partner in consortium. Winning SMEs are often university startups. We don't have this number for startups because you cannot differentiate between SMEs and startups. 34.6% of contracts won by bidders that are from country of any of the procurers in the buyers group, so that stimulates a cross-border company growth. This number is only 1.26 average in public procurements across Europe. What is the cross-border company growth? So we have suppliers that have won a contract from a procurement where the consortium, the buyers group, is comprised by procurers that are not from the country of the supplier. And this will be illustrated later in the map that I will show you. Next slide, please. Creating growth. What is about the impacts for the procurements itself, for the procurers also? Creates growth and jobs in Europe. 98.7% of bidders in these 16 PCPs do 100% of R&D activities in Europe. They buy 50% cheaper R&D because the IPRs stay with the suppliers, and they improve the quality and efficiency of public services. I have to move faster, that's why I will skip this part. Next slide, please. Some lessons learned. Separating PCP from PPI and using this phased PCP approach opens the market for small players, SMEs, because as I've mentioned, procurers in PCPs, since they don't buy the commercial volumes of the innovative solution, can be more flexible and can have more flexible selection criteria that allow the participation of SMEs. Stimulates cooperation with universities and larger companies as well as small companies. Joint cross-border procurement PCP stimulates better company growth and facilitates the creation of more open standards-based interoperable solutions. And the leaving of IPR ownership rights reduces the cost of going for innovative solution for the procurers and encourages wider commercialization of solutions by vendors. And of course, the place of performance in Europe stimulates growth and jobs in Europe. Next slide, please. Geographic location of bidders, winning bidders and procurers. These maps illustrates what I have already mentioned. As you can see, there are countries that do not have procurers, but they are in the consortium of these 16 PCPs, but they still have companies that have won a contract in this 16 PCPs. With regards to Switzerland, we have. I will start with procurers that participate in our PCPs. It's the Federal Polytechnical School of Lausanne that participates in the Human Brain Project as procurer, as was the ETH Zurich University that participates also in the same Human Brain Project in this Human Brain Project. Beyond PCPs, in CSA's network of procurers, We have CERN participating in the PIXE project and the NHS Cloud project. Quaco, it's a project that it is not implemented, funded by DG Connect, by DG RTD. However, it's a PCP on magnets, and it's a PCP where CERN participates as procurer. Moreover, the companies that have won a contract in these PCPs are Martel GmbH, one company that is called Six, Exoscale in HNC Cloud, the Swiss Department in Human Brain Project, IBM in the Swiss Department Human Brain Project. We have universities participating as collaborating with other companies in other PCPs where there are no Swiss procurers. The École Polytechnique de Lausanne in email project, as well as the University of Basel Interforma project. All information about this project can be found, as well as the links to these projects can be found on our webpage that I will give you in my last slide. Next slide, please. Now we'll explain how the Horizon 2020 support to PCP and PPI actions takes place. Next slide, please. We have three types of actions: coordination and support actions that prepare the ground for future PCPs or PPIs where the funding rate is 100%. We have PCP actions. In those PCP actions, it is funded the preparation of a PCP, the preparation of the tender documents, the networking between the procurers, as well as the actual PCP, the procurement budget, and the funding rate for these PCP actions is 90%, and PPI actions the same, preparation of the PPI and the actual PPI cost, the funding rate is 35%. Why it is lower than PCP? Because in PPI, as I've mentioned, there is no R&D involved, only the actual purchase of the solution. That's why it is the funding rate is lower compared to the funding rate of the PCP actions. Next slide, please. What is the requirement for Horizon 2020 to participate as beneficiary to receive grant for us in order to prepare to implement a PCP and PPI? Minimum 3 independent participants from 3 different member states or associated countries, of which 2 minimum public procurers from 2 different member states or associated countries. So, for example, a public procurer, a hospital, let's take a hospital from France, a hospital from Germany, plus a university from Switzerland is an eligible consortium, respects the minimum requirements to participate in our PCP and PPI action calls. Next slide, please. The roles in these projects, the buyers group, are those that have committed the budget to purchase the innovative solutions. In the example that I gave you, the buyers group is comprised of the 2 hospitals located in France and in Germany. The lead procurer is the one that that implements the PCP or PPI procurement in the name and on behalf of the other procurers. It shall be a public entity that may or may not participate in the buyers group. And the subcontractors, who are the subcontractors? The suppliers that in PCPs develop the innovative solutions, provide the R&D services, and in PPI, the suppliers that provide the innovative goods or services. These subcontractors are not legally connected with they're not signed the grant agreement, they are not connected legally associated with the commission, they are associated only with the procurers with whom they sign the framework agreement and the contracts. Next slide, please. We have two stages in PCP and PPI, the preparation stage. Preparation stage, prepare one PCP or one joint or coordinated PPI, and execution stage where the implementation of PCP and PPI is taking place. Next slide, please. The reimbursement, of course, I've mentioned that, what it covers. What is worth to note is that VAT is an eligible cost unless for beneficiaries that can deduct it. On top of this funding, there is 25% funding for indirect costs, but not indirect costs on the price of the PCP or PPI procurement, or on third-party resources not used at the beneficiary premises. Pre-financing, one pre-financing at the start of the project for costs for preparation stage, second pre-financing before the execution stage for the rest of the costs to implement the PCP or PPI. Next slide, please. The ELFIP initiative, it's an initiative launched by DG Connect aiming to mainstream innovation procurement across Europe. It is comprised of 4 different activities. Toolkit, for example, if you visit our web page, our ELFIP initiative web page, you will find a toolkit that is addressed, comprised of 3 modules addressed to policymakers, to public procurement officers, providing hands-on information on how to implement a good PCP or PPI, and module 3 is addressed to lawyers that consult the public procurers. We have a lot of workshops and conferences. On Friday 16th, a workshop on innovation procurement in the transport domain is taking place in Brussels, but in October, I will show you that later, an event is taking place in Tallinn. This is the slide about the toolkit, what this toolkit contains. Next slide, please. This is a slide about the annual innovation procurement event that we organize in the framework of this initiative. This time, this high-level event will take place under the auspices of the Estonian presidency, Tallinn, on 17th and 18th of October. Don't miss this opportunity to get in touch with people that are doing innovation procurements, to hear firsthand from people that have implemented, from SMEs and companies that have been awarded a contract, and how these contracts have helped them scale up, as well as the funding opportunities that for procurers to finance their PCPs or PPIs through Horizon 2020. We'll also present it there. By that time, we will have the next work program published, so we will be able to present the new calls on innovation procurement in the work program 2018-2020. Next slide, please. these are some useful links where you can find more information about innovation procurement. On our web page, we have all the activities per member states also listed in our web page. There is also a brochure where you can find more information about the ongoing DigiConnect funded PCPs and PPIs, as well as CSAs to support to prepare the grounds for future PCPs and PPIs. And this is the web page of the European Assistance for Innovation Procurement, the EAFIP initiative. That's all for my part. I don't know, Agnes, if we have the time to watch a small video from an ongoing PCP. It's ongoing, but this PCP is specific. Why? Because already in phase 2 they realized that the solutions developed for this PCP that is called Thalea in the e-health domain are so good, are tackling their need, so that they moved to a PPI already in phase 2 of the PCP. Agnes, if we have time, we can watch this small video about Thalea PCP.
Yes, thank you, Aziz. I think we have for the then.
In this example, in the video, a group of hospital procurers from 5 different countries completed a pre-commercial procurement in only 1.5 years, between March 2015 and October 2016. The 5 hospitals completed the publication of the call for tender, all the research and development and field testing across the 5 countries in 1.5 years' time, between March 2015 and October 2016. This shows that pre-commercial procurement can really reduce time to market when it is implemented by procurers with a real procurement need in mind.
My name is Robert Dice. I'm working in the University Hospital of Aachen in the Department of Critical Care. I'm active in the project Thalea, which means pre-commercial procurement, where we are looking for a telemedicine software platform that will help us to extract data from critically ill patients and to condense these in a view in a telemedicine center. In our project consortium, we have intensive care specialists from Spain, from the Parc Taulí Hospital in Barcelona. We have the University of Oulu. We have an academic teaching hospital in Belgium, in Genk, together with us, and our direct academic neighbor, the University Hospital of Maastricht, is also participating in this consortium. A pan-European approach improves the chances of the future product because we are prevented from creating a closed shop solution. We are able, with help of other experts from the field of critical care over Europe, to get a common specification which is usable all over Europe, and to have a common understanding of this project. When we are practicing telemedicine, which we are doing for several years, we noticed that there is a lack of a software that allows us to extract data from different subsystems, which we call PDMS, Patient Data Management Systems. And but we saw that the data from these systems will support our daily work. For example, if we are caring in the field of intensive care for a patient with a severe infection, every minute counts, and we are convinced that an ICT support which detects patterns of, for example, severe infections will help us to react quite early and faster than in the conventional way in medicine, and faster than in the way we are doing telemedicine nowadays. Thalia is an ICT project, and of course every ICT project needs hardware, but the main focus is on software. We received 3 prototypes which are all extremely promising, and we now enter, if you imagine the PCP funding scheme, in the phase 3 of the pre-commercial procurement, and we will evaluate the pre-series models, and we'll have 3 very advanced pre-series models of a telemedicine and a telemedicine center software. When I look back to the last months of the Thalia project, I have a lot of lessons learned. In my eyes, the most important lesson is pre-commercial procurement is a very effective measure to close the innovation gap which we are facing in Europe. That's the one thing. And the next is, it's a brilliant idea to bring experts together on one table and to stimulate innovation on the side of the industry. Because normally the industry is developing and is thinking in new products and new selling opportunities, and PCP is, in my eyes, inducing some kind of market pull where the experts say what they are needing, and they are offering for the innovators from the industry a chance which was maybe overlooked so far. And the most important message is, I would do it again, and we are doing it again in a follow Public Procurement of Innovative solution, and we are also partner in a couple now of other cross-border pre-commercial procurements, especially in the field of healthcare.
Okay, so we cut this video here because the information is most of it you presented already. There was one question from Can you hear me now? So the question was, how do suppliers usually get involved? Is it can they be more proactive? Can they initiate projects? How are suppliers usually involved in these, typically in this type of projects?
Calls are addressed mainly to public procurers. These are the beneficiaries of, mainly the beneficiaries of our public procurement PCP and PPI budget, where the suppliers can come into the stage. The public procurers receive budget from us in order to implement a PCP or a PPI procurement. So the procurers organize their replies according to our Horizon 2020 requirements, open market consultations where they invite all market players interested for this area in order to present their public procurement need, to present their intention to buy, and to hear what the market is capable of offering. After this open market consultation, and having received the feedback from the market players, the PCP and PPI procurers, the public services meaning, are launching a call for tenders where they invite the suppliers, mainly all types of suppliers and interested economic operators, to put it in a better way, all interested economic operators to submit an offer in order to award them framework agreements and contracts. So the companies, the suppliers, the economic operators are not directly involved with the Commission, but associated with the Commission, but with the procurers who they award them contracts and framework agreements, and they receive funding for their solutions.
Okay, thank you. What are there any requirements for the financial viability of companies?
Actually, the only requirement that we set in our Horizon 2020 documents is that the procurers should not hamper the participation of startups and SMEs in general in the public procurement call for tenders. So they should not put selection criteria, for example, annual high turnovers to that could make difficult the participation of SMEs in the PCPs and PPIs. With regards to the financial availability, then it is the procurers that they decide how they draft their call for tenders and what is the existing national legislation that obliges the procurers to put in their call for tenders. So for us, the requirement that we have is the only requirement that we have is not to hamper the participation of smaller companies in these procurements by, for example, putting very strict selection criteria.
Okay, last question. Maybe with the answer, what are the eligible rules for SMEs and can they come from third countries?
Now, just to understand, eligible for our calls or for the procurements?
For, well, Nicole,
because there are
the tender calls.
Yes, as we have said, for the tender calls, we require the calls to be open, so they cannot have restricted or negotiated procedures. Or our calls are open and are open to all SMEs, provided that, especially for PCP, they do the majority of R&D in Europe or associated in member states or associated countries.
Okay, thank you very much, Vasilis. And if there are any more questions, don't hesitate to send them to the email announced on. And now we continue with Bob.
Very much, Vasilis. I think you said you had to go, but please send your if you have further questions. Stefan is going to type you the email address, and I'm going to hand it over now to Bob Jones, who is going to present you. He is the coordinator for the Helix Nebula Science Cloud project at CERN, and he's going to present a successful testimonial.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Thanks for the invitation. Can you hear me?
Yes, very good sound, Bob.
All right, okay. So yeah, so that Anya said, I will follow on a bit from Vasilis, and I'll explain to you our experiences in running an ongoing pre-commercial procurement project, which is coordinated here at CERN. My name is Bob Jones. I work in the IT department here at CERN, and we are running the pre-commercial procurement called Helix Nebula Science Cloud, HNSI Cloud for short. And we're pretty much halfway through this pre-commercial procurement. So I'll explain to you in concrete terms some of the steps involved and some of the lessons we've learned as well in executing our first PCP project. As Vasilis said, we do have another PCP project running in parallel here at CERN called Quaco, which is focusing on development of new magnets for our accelerator, and that is working with another directorate in the EC. And these two PCPs are progressing in parallel. Just to tell you how is it set up, well, we have a procurement group of 10 procurers as you can see from this map online, these are 10 research performing organizations from all across Europe. And we are aided by 2 experts who are not procurers, but they are helping us with specific aspects of the project. For example, Trust IT is doing communications work for us and outreach, and EGIR.eu is helping us with interfacing to some of the pan-European e-infrastructures and also working with the long tail of science users. So what's happened is that each of these procurers have committed some of their own cash as part of a procurement fund, which we've put together. They're also putting in their own manpower from their own organizations for testing and evaluation purposes of the services to be developed by the project. And of course, they have their own applications and data, because this is an ICT application. They have their own applications and data, which will be used as part of this testing process. And the resulting services will be made available to end users from many research communities, not just physics at CERN, but for life sciences, earth sciences, photo and neutron sciences, and several others as well, which are all supported by the group of 10 procurers. As we said, we're co-funded under Horizon 2020. The funding rates for this call were lower than the ones that Vasilis mentioned. This is co-funded at the rate of 70% rather than 90%. As Vasilis has mentioned, that rate has now increased. So from a procurer's point of view, the latest calls are more favourable. Okay, so we have a total procurement budget, including the money committed by the procurers and the European Commission, of approximately 5.3 million euros. The fundamental challenge that we have is shown on this graph, where we have already a number of ICT services in-house at the procurers' organizations, representing essentially big science, and they are all operating their own computer or data centers and are connected to the network. But what we want to do is be able to expand those services and introduce new services, making use of commercial cloud services, which are not hosted on our own data centers, but hosted in the data centers of commercial companies. And we want to be able to link those in a hybrid model. So the idea being that we can use the same login identity to access services on our own data centers or on the commercial data centers, and that we should be able to see the same data or same file systems, if you want, across our own data centers and the commercial data centers using the high performance network. And here we're working with the GEON network, which is present across Europe. And in Switzerland, the local representative for that is, of course, Switch. So this hybrid model is a key element of the environment and the challenges that we are asking the companies to address in this PCP. Vasilis explained the phases involved in the pre-commercial procurement. So, of course, we've done the solution exploration, which is essentially the open market, including the open market consultation. We've performing a solution design phase. We've got past that. We're now into the prototyping phase. And at the end, we will have a pilot phase. And at the end, there could be the uptake, either via a PPI or directly to commercialization or by other means as well. So what's the story so far? This slide highlights the steps taken so far. Here we can see for the solution exploration, well, that started in January 2016 and lasted 9 months. We had an open market consultation event hosted here at CERN. It was attended by over 70 representatives from European public-private cloud service providers. We also webcast the event, so it's an event a bit like this as well, so people could join remotely, with the intention of increasing participation from different companies and so on. We then moved towards the preparing the tender, the common tender that was agreed on by all 10 procurers. with a common set of technical requirements and the common framework agreement. And we received bids, 10 bids involving 30 multinational companies, SMEs, and public research organizations from 13 different countries. Out of that, we did an adjudication of the bids, and we selected 4 bids, so 4 winning consortia, and they were awarded contracts for the design phase in November 2016. So this overall, this whole process, there were more than 200 relevant stakeholders engaged from the demand side and the supply side and all the potential bidders and so on. And it was very well shown in the press. We did a lot of effort to make it well known to the market. In the next stage, having made those contracts, the consortia were then working between October 2016 and March 2017 to produce the designs for this hybrid cloud set of services. And they delivered their designs in February of this year, 2017. And we then did an evaluation of those, and the eligible contractors out of those 4 then submitted their bids for the next phase, which is the prototype phase, which started in March. And the evaluation committee assessed these, and we selected the 3 most promising of the designs, and they were awarded contracts with an award ceremony, which was webcast as well. And they've now moved into the procurement phase. The award ceremony for the prototype phase and also for the design phase are recorded and available via the Helix Nebula website as well. So the next step is that we are now, well, here you see highlighted in red are the companies which have progressed through to the prototype phase. You see the mixture of multinational companies, small companies, SMEs and so on, and also public entities, of which we can see here that there are 2 Swiss companies involved, the 6 Squared and Exascale. Okay, the next stage, the current work we're doing is that those consortia, 3 consortia, are actively working to develop the software services for this prototypes, and this is the ongoing work at the moment. All right. Now, this progress and setting up the Helix Nebula Science Cloud pre-commercial procurement was really only possible because we started with a support action before launching the PCP. Vasilis mentioned that the coordination support actions exist, and we actually use this one called Pixie, and you can find the results of that online. And really for us, the advantage of this was it helped identify the gaps, so we understood what are the sorts of challenges that we are likely to put in the tender. It helped us learn more about the PCP instrument, and we also are able to create the group of potential procurers, because the important point is that you have to find those public sector organizations who are willing to put their own money on the table to be part of the procurement. Okay. Judith has asked if there are spin-off possible from a PCP PPI, like Marie Curie and so on. My understanding is yes, and we are ourselves looking at other means of how the results of the PCP project we're working with will be used in the context of something called the European Open Science Cloud, which I will come to later. So I invite you to look at the Pixie website if you want to learn a bit more about the sort of activities that the support action performed before we started the PCP itself. And in fact, it was the support action that convinced us that the PCP was a suitable instrument for us to use for our procurement activity. Now some lessons learned about this. So first of all, concerning the financial model, because there are different ways of approaching the procurement. So inside Helix Nebula, we adopted the lead procurer model, and this proved appropriate. And we also took some steps as well, which I think has helped us ensure good progress in the project, is that there were financial commitments by all the procurers before the proposal submission. So we insisted that anybody that wanted to be a beneficiary in the project as a procurer, they had to make a formal commitment on the level of the procurement investment they were prepared to make as part of the PCP. And then the rules about how this procurement group work are all specified in the consortium agreement. And having been involved in many other projects, the consortium agreement for a pre-commercial procurement project is far more important, because in our situation, not all procurers are putting in the same sums of money. So you have to have in that all the rules about how are decisions made, taking into account the level of procurement commitment, and also the rights of access to the resulting services, again, taking into account the level of procurement commitment. So those are important parts to remember in those things. Okay. We also had the ability to include additional procurers after the grant agreement was signed, but before the tender was launched. And this is an important thing, because that permitted us to grow the procurement group. However, what one has to understand here is that those additional procurers that come in after the grant agreement is signed, they are in a sense taking less risks than those that initially participated in the proposal preparation. And consequently, they were not allocated any funded manpower in the project, but they were allowed to participate as a procurer and profit from the EC co-funding for the tender itself. Okay. So Judith is asking if a consortium agreement is advisable, however not obliged. My understanding is that the consortium agreement is obligatory. Yeah. And I would not recommend starting a PCPA without having a signed consortium agreement. Okay. Now this flexibility that was brought in was really only possible because CERN took the lead procurer role, which has also made it possible to do this, and we act as anchor tenant. That means that we are actually making the largest procurement commitment of any of the other procurers, and we were willing to accommodate new procurers by essentially adjusting our own procurement budget. So we reduced slightly our procurement budget to accommodate other procurers. And this is really only possible in the lead procurer financial model. Okay. So the other thing is that the additional procurers then, they were not beneficiaries, so they did not sign the grant agreement, but we insisted that they signed a consortium agreement. Okay. Other things from the financial model. While I agree with all the points that Vasilis stated about the advantages of a PCP, the point of financial competition we do not think is so strong in the PCP model as it stands today. And this is because the obligation to publish the amount of funds that you are making available in the tender limits the competition. If the bidders know that you are going to award 4 contracts and know the total sum of money, then they know automatically what is the total amount of money that they could bid for in that procurement. So automatically, this reduces the variation in the financial offers that are submitted. And that we can confirm is the observation we have seen at CERN when we compare PCP procurements to non-PCP procurements. Having said that, you can limit this impact by having a good understanding of what represents value for money before you launch the tender. So understanding how much you can ask for according to market prices is a good way of ensuring that it still represents value for money. But it's important to do that study beforehand, and that is part of the market study that you can perform. We ran an open market consultation event, as I mentioned earlier, where we presented the principles of the framework agreement and we encouraged the bidders to raise questions. We also used a technique called planning poker, which you can look up online, and it was very useful in the sense that the problem is that when you hold one of these open market consultation events, the potential bidders do not want to give away too much information about what way in which they would bid, because there are other potential bidders in the room. Now, the planning poker technique allows you to gather their inputs in such a competitive environment. And this was very useful for us, and it helped us narrow down very quickly on what were the most innovative aspects of the challenges we were proposing and what were considered the highest risks by the potential bidders. And we used an outside consultant who was paid on a subcontracting contract using the EC funds in order to perform this. And I would recommend to use this technique in the future. We would have liked to hold a second event, but we lacked time for it because we produced, based on the first event, we produced the tender material, and it would have been good to share a draft of that tender material with potential bidders and retrieve and gather their feedback, because that would have reduced the total number of requests for clarifications which we later received. In the end, we received something like 70 requests for clarifications, and of course, it took effort to answer to all of them. Okay, but the tender information day that we held afterwards, once the tender had been published, it did answer many of these questions, and it was a very useful discussion with potential bidders. I think it gave more confidence to the bidders about what was involved. One regret we have is that none of the bidders were ready to raise legal points before the signature of the framework agreement, which meant the signature of the framework agreement itself became a very time-critical process. And we would like to find ways of making sure we can address the legal points, which will be raised by potential bidders, before we got to the bid submission phase. About the PCP instrument itself, we think it needs to be adapted to support services as well as product innovation. At the moment, it's more intended in its setup for product innovation, some physical product. The idea of a service is not fully embedded in the PCP concept. So, for example, the restrictions on place of performance of the R&D activities are not strictly so relevant for software services. Much of the software development that is performed today, the people perform it at home with their own laptop and a high-speed network. They don't need a factory or anything similar. Okay, so it is less relevant. The other issues we see is that the PCP payment model would also need to become more flexible. For example, in cloud services, the pay-per-usage model is prevalent. Is very popular, and that is not permitted in a PCP because you cannot predict in advance the total sum of money that will be given as a contract to each contractor. So that is a limitation. And also the R&D costs, which represent 50% of the PCP across the phases, are not the same for services. It's the development, the design and the development time, the prototyping phases, are where there is the most R&D. But for software services where you can replicate it by just duplicating an image, the actual pilot phase does not represent such a high level of R&D. So having this strict rule of 50% R&D in each phase limits the scale of deployments that can be tested, and hence potentially their impact. We would have liked to have spent more effort or more money in the pilot phase on the deployment, so that we could have had the resulting services used by far more users. So we would like to propose in the future that overall the PCP respects the 50% R&D rule, but that it is flexible across each of these three phases. Second part of that instrument is that we, probably from our own fault, is we underestimated the time and effort required. Each call-off phase, that means asking the contractors to submit bids for the next phase, in reality takes at least 2 months for the process itself. If you have a significant number of procurers, they have to collectively agree on the assessment and the adjudication of those phases. Okay, so that takes more time, which we didn't anticipate at the start, and also the amount of effort that is required from the buyers group to ensure the high quality of the resulting services. It means we need a continuous dialogue with the contractors to guide them and give them feedback, and also do our own testing. And that far exceeds the funded effort that's available inside the project, because you can, as was stated by Vasilis, we can only spend 30% of that on the coordination support activities, and we've spent significantly more of that on our own effort. We continue to put in this effort because we believe the results will be worthwhile. So what sort of impact? Well, clearly it generated a lot of interest in the cloud services market. I mentioned the number of bids that have been received and so on, and that for us was very good, a lot of interest. And I'm just putting online for you now a link to a document that gives you the latest figures and information about the sort of impact, which you can download and read. And I must say the majority of the submitted bids were of a very high quality. We were impressed by them all. And the majority of them were by companies from EU member states. Okay, but we did have a significant number of SMEs and universities that have participated in the bidding consortia. And one thing we didn't expect is that we saw a number of FP7 and Horizon 2020 projects were cited in the bids as sources of innovation contributing to the pro solutions. So this implies that PCP offers a potential exploitation path for the results of EC funded projects. Okay. Another important point that we used in the tendering was identifying suitable international standards. And this was for two reasons. One, to avoid vendor lock-in. And secondly, it also helps us to simplify the tender documents. Rather than having to explain all the technical details, we could simply refer to these standards and say that your bid should be compatible with these standards. So we did this in the area of service level agreements for cloud services, security, and also in terms of the system design document templates as well. So I would encourage you to do during the preparation phase to identify the relevant international standards which could be used as part of the tender material. Another thing, we did this because we wanted to encourage the contractors to make the results of their developments available via open source licenses in the case that a contractor decided not to commercialize the results in the end. We would still have access to the results. And this is something that was a lot of discussion. How do we ensure that we do get access to the results in the end, even if the contractors did not commercialize them? There are clauses for this in the framework agreement, which are also permitted by the EC. But we found that we wanted to promote also open source approaches. And I'm pleased to say that the majority of the bids did propose to distribute the results using open source licenses. So some lessons learned from the design phase. First of all, we found afterwards that you should prepare detailed information about each use case, including what are the likely performance and technical constraints. The more detailed you can be, the easier it is, because the contractors will ask all of these questions. And we found it better to identify an owner amongst the group of procurers who's capable of responding to the questions for each use case. because there will be a dialogue. Okay? And that you should start this dialogue between the buyers group and the contractors as early as possible and continue it during the whole phase. Then there's the part about setting intermediate milestones so you can judge the progress. And also, we relied on each of the procurers to do this, but in a future project, we would establish a dedicated small technical team from the buyers group who would lead these activities for us as well. You can see all these lessons learned and a number of others in the document, which is called the Summary of the Design Stage and Lessons Learned, which is available via the website. Okay. So the question before about what comes afterwards. Well, we see the results of this as integrating in what the European Commission is promoting as something called the European Open Science Cloud, a mechanism by which open research data and services can be shared across different disciplines and across different countries within Europe. And we strongly believe that commercial cloud services will be an essential part of the European Open Science Cloud. And I'm pleased to say that the European Commission has acknowledged this. Earlier this week at an event, a summit in Brussels on Monday, they highlighted that procurement will be an important point of the European Open Science Cloud. So one of the spin-off projects we expect to be is that we expect these resulting services to be made available via the European Open Science Cloud and hence become available to the whole of European the research community. Okay, so with that, thank you very much for your attention, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Bob, for the great summary, and you gave a lot of advice that I hope that potential bidders will take on board. We will also, I noticed you had a couple of messages to the Commission, and Vasilis had to leave earlier, so we will transfer these messages to him. I have seen also that you answered a lot of questions during the talk. I would just like to ask, I have a question, but maybe, okay, in the room here not, and are there any questions on the participant side? Any more questions? Okay, so my question, I understand that the road from submission to grant award was not obstacle-free. What is the one advice? I mean, you gave a lot of advice, but what is the one single advice that you would definitely give to potential applicants that you would like to use this, would consider this applying for this instrument that you would give?
I think I would, as a procurer, I would be very careful who I also include as other procurers. You have to be sure before you start that you have enough points in common that you will reach agreement on the focus of the tender you want to perform. If your requirements are too divergent, you will delay the project, and the usefulness of the resulting services are less likely to be as encouraging as you might hope. Now, in our case, all the procurers of research performing organizations used to working in an international context and used to supporting a number of scientific domains with also relevant IT expertise. And I think that was an essential point for us. So bottom line is, pick carefully who are your procurers and make sure they're committed before you start.
Okay, thank you very much. I have one more question. So you have a lot of experience in submitting proposals, both RIA and CSA, but this proposal that you had to submit to the Commission for funding, how different was it in terms of writing the proposal? Any advice on that for potential applicants?
I think it is probably the project where we did the proposal where we did the most work on the state of the art assessment and the potential impact. Those are extremely important. The other parts of the proposal, essentially, you have to explain, looking at the PCP requirements, and there's a good guideline document, you basically have to explain what you're intending to do for each part of that. And so that element of it was fairly simple, even though you have to be precise.
Okay. Thank you very much, Bob, for joining us today. I'm handing over to Stefan now.
Yes, thanks again to our two speakers. The next step will be, well, you can, of course, and you see the email here, you can continue asking questions, and we will try to answer them as good as we can. Also, in the next few days, you will get an email with a link to a questionnaire that we would like to fill you in. It will be a SurveyMonkey questionnaire that you can fill in on a very short one that you can fill in on the SurveyMonkey website. And all this information, and including the links to the recording and the presentations, will be also on our event page. But give us a few days for that. Having said that, thank you very much again, all of you, for listening and for asking questions. I hope we will have some similar events soon, maybe in autumn. Tell us what you think, and tell us what your information requirements are and what you need to know. Please have a look at our events page, at the Euresearch event page, and register for events. You find all the information on the event page that you probably know already. Thank you, and goodbye.